Some weeks we kind of just wing these videos, but I feel like this week we actually have a lot of content to be discussing.
Do love content, and this is a big content patch that we've learned a lot about in the past few days. Patch 10.1. Big news,
Dude.
of the Embers of Neltharion update.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff coming with this one. We're going to go through all of it.
So yeah, we're definitely going to recap all of the stuff that we learned about 10.1. I guess to start, we could talk about 10.0.7 because we also got a firm date for 10.0.7, March 21st for NA, 22nd for EU. This comes with kind of some of the stuff that we had talked about in some previous videos with like the Forbidden Reach. You know, we're going to have the Annulet ring, or we're going to have the Annulet ring. They're also going to get new Dragon Riding upgrade paths. Anything else that's like super big? I guess Ret Paladin rework. Paladin reworks.
Yeah, the Ret Paladin rework. So that's all 10.0.7, and yeah, that is coming 2 weeks from now. So
yes.
Or I guess 1 week and a half from now. Very, very soon.
Okay, let's talk about some of the coolest stuff that we've seen in 10.1 and kind of recap a lot of it. And we'll start with the dungeon pool because I think that this has been one of the most discussed points. We have learned what the legacy dungeons were. So we knew that the 4 Dragonflight dungeons were going to be the ones that we hadn't had previously, which were, of course, Halls of Infusion, Brackenhide, Hollow, Uldaman, and Neltharis. And to add on to those, we have Neltharion's Lair, Freehold, Underrot, and the Vortex Pinnacle. Wow.
Vortex Pinnacle. Wow, indeed.
Okay. Whenever I heard that Freehold and Underrot were back, I was stunned, by the way. Like that, I think that Morgan Day said in a couple of interviews that whenever people are making like fake leak posts and they talk about the dungeons that they want to see, Freehold is almost always on everybody's list as one of the most popular dungeons of all time.
Yeah, Freehold, I think not surprising. That was one they said, you know, like, we're just bringing this back because
it's good.
Otherwise we would get letters, which makes sense. You know, that's it is a popular old dungeon. The others, though, yeah, I mean, Nelslayer, it's lore lineups, right? That's benefit with that one. And then Vortex Pinnacle, though, you know, I don't really remember the story of that place all that well, but that place is one as well.
I'm really interested to see how Vortex Pinnacle turns out. So we have a dungeon that is from an older era this season with Temple of the Jade Serpent, and what Blizzard had to do is basically rework functionally how all of the mobs in that dungeon worked to make sure it was more modern. That was the one that I think got the biggest revamp in regards to what the mobs did previously versus what they do now. I think that Vortex Pinnacle, since it was from Cataclysm, is probably going to see a similar level of refurbish with what the mobs do, what the mechanics are. Maybe the only thing that stays the same is like kind of how the bosses work in some aspects of them. And then obviously the art for the dungeon itself is going to be consistent, which I think is probably a large portion of the design time into dungeons is just like the artwork, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that shouldn't be too much extra. I
think that, like, I mean, we commented on this a while ago whenever we were learning about the dungeon cadence and how this is going to be. We talked about them refurbishing dungeons, what that was going to look like. And I think that Blizzard actually really stepped up to the challenge and kind of exceeded my expectations in regards to what those refurbished dungeons look like in Season 1. Morgan mentioned a couple of times that they need to make sure that nothing is Shadow Moon, Burial Grounds, and Court of Stars level of difficulty, which I think the fact that they are aware also was a very positive thing that we learned. Overall, though, for Vortex Pinnacle, I'm surprised because they said that they didn't really want to do any dungeons pre-Mist of Pandaria, but then they slammed this Kata dungeon in here. But I think that they have kind of proven to themselves that they can figure this kind of stuff out.
Well, I think the Kata dungeon is a big open question of like how well is it going to work out as a little dungeon. That's something that we don't know yet whether that's going to be good and fun or if there's going to be problems with it. But yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm willing to give it a shot as well. It's not one of the old dungeons I would have expected to see come back.
I would have never expected that one.
Yeah, should be cool to see.
I'm down to pair it with 2 fan favorites though, in Underrot and Freehold, which people are like,
Freehold's a fan favorite. Underrot's more
It was one of
divisive. It's a little more niche.
It was one of your favorites, though, right? Like
it's one of my favorites, yeah, but it's not a universal favorite like Freehold. Freehold is like,
of course,
95+% of M+ players or whatever likes it.
A lot of people like Underrot, though. I think that say that it's like hated or anything.
Yeah, but a lot less than it's like the 6th most popular dungeon in that expansion. It's not. It's nowhere near Freehold.
Okay, so in addition to that, Morgan also mentioned stuff like Brackenhide Hollow and Halls of Infusion were going to get some changes. They knew that the dungeons were going to be, kind of out of line. Yeah. He kind of said to expect major changes to Brackenhide and Halls of Infusion in particular, with either what mobs are there, how the mobs work, that kind of thing. He said various things in different interviews, and we've already seen some changes to the Dragonflight dungeons, which kind of correspond with that. Now,
yeah, not surprised to start seeing these things get hotfixed in. We also know about M+. No seasonal affix. Seasonal affix gone. Level 7 affixes are getting an affix refresh of some kind. We don't know what that looks like.
Yes.
But the seasonal is gone entirely. It's unclear if it's ever coming back. They didn't say anything definitive about it, but they did say, look, the seasonal affix was created because dungeons felt the same over the whole expansion.
Yep.
That's something that we didn't need to do now that we have new dungeons every season. And we thought, okay, let's try and have something that is still a more persistent element of the dungeon, but adds to the gameplay. And then Thundering sucked or whatever. They got a lot of feedback about it. They decided to just can the whole idea.
I'm really interested in this. So I guess we'll talk about seasonals, and I'll give my thoughts on seasonals first. I actually kind of like seasonals. I'm kind of sad to see them go, but at the same point, I think that, and this is something that we mentioned in our last video when we were talking about affixes, I think that they need to try something new with just the affix system in general, and what that looks like, I'm like kind of unsure of. I'm down to try this though without a seasonal affix. I liked seasonals because they had the ability to be super complex, honestly super punishing, but at the same point, very rewarding if you performed them well. And I thought that was kind of cool about the seasonal affixes. In addition to that, them being, flavored towards the season, flavored towards the raid, that kind of thing. I really did feel like it kind of tied it into every single dungeon in a way that I was pretty cool with. At the same point, though, we haven't had too much change with the landscape of M+ in a while. Like, we've had seasonals since BFA. Now we're kind of getting rotating dungeons, and I think that playing around with affixes and seeing how players feel about them is going to be to the players' benefit in the long term, and at least we have something new.
Yeah, I'm also sad a little bit about seasonals going away, because I've loved several seasonal affixes, but also I've hated a few of them too, and so I'm not necessarily unhappy, especially if the level 7 affix refresh has, maybe now that the seasonals are gone, the level 7s can have some degree of a little bit, I guess, more fun stuff happening with them. Maybe from some of the good old seasonals. I don't know. I don't know what they're planning to do with that bucket, but it'll be really interesting. Yeah. I'm sure whenever we know more about what's happening with those affixes, we will have that be a topic of one of these videos.
Okay, so there's a level 7 refresh, which the level 7 affixes are Quaking, Grievous, Volcanic, Storming, Explosive. So not the on-death affix row, the miscellaneous utility row. So they said that we're going to take a closer look at level 7 bucket and how much opportunity there is for counterplay, how much of this is making your healer's life harder versus how much of that is there an opportunity where if I play really well, I can negate the affix. They use the term refresh. I don't know what that's necessarily going to mean. Does that mean like a full rework? Does that mean that they're going to just nerf these affixes? Like, what does refresh really mean in this context?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Is this a big thing, or is this a, small thing, right? Like, I don't know. I'm open to pretty much whatever they're doing with this, though. I think it's a cool thing to mess around with.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about it a little bit. We think that they need to be doing something new with affixes. Otherwise, they were going to continue down this road where affixes are getting stale. M+, while we are getting new dungeons every single season, kind of still runs the similar issues where it's like, oh yeah, affixes aren't the greatest. But I think that overall, I was really surprised about this with how fast, because the community's been talking about this only for a couple of weeks now, and Blizzard to have news about pretty significant affix changes coming into 10.1.
It makes you think that this was probably already planned, right? Like their thoughts lined up with ours. Maybe though the Thundering discussion over the past few months has been a part of why the seasonal has gone entirely. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. Also had a couple of other things. We had An interview from yourself and Steve Deneuser and Morgan Day. Anything from here that you wanted to talk about?
So they talked a little bit about this new upgrade system that's coming, which is pretty nifty. It is Valor is gone.
Yes.
Valor is gone entirely. And there's going to be a system with flight stones, which are basically AP, basically XP, basically primal chaos, right? It's this currency that just drops from anything. There's no cap to it. There's no anything like that. But it drops from everything. You got more of it from the higher level stuff. But then there are these crests, and there's a crest for each different type of difficulty. Whelplings, worms, drakes, and aspects. And you can use these crests plus the flight stones to upgrade gear all the way up to 415 equivalent, right? To the next patch is equivalent to 415.
Yes.
So you can upgrade gear to the same level as now. The difference is you can upgrade raid gear as well. You can upgrade heroic and normal gear up to either mythic, 415 equivalent or 411 respectively from those two forms of content, which is pretty cool. There's also a slight difference. You can't upgrade gear from below certain key levels up to 415 equivalent. Like if you're farming mid keys, you're only going to be able to bring the gear all the way up to like 411 equivalent. And if you're farming low keys, it's only going to be able to come up to like 398 equivalent, I think. So that's going to be something that is maybe a slight nerf to that playstyle. But on the other hand, these flight stones are basically just fully uncapped, pretty much uncapped. And the crests are pretty close to it too. There's a cap of getting 10 per crest per week of each type, but you're very quickly, in no way are you going to run into that cap at all, except for maybe the first week.
Maybe. So this is a situation where you are only maybe going to run into the cap that first week. There's also something where alts are actually pretty incentivized in the system. So you sit there and you think, oh man, this is a lot of stuff to be grinding for my alts. This is going to kind of be like primal focus. What's the deal with alts with this system? Because this is like a big change, right?
It's not just alts as well. Another problem that Valor had that it fixes is on your main, Valor upgrading like a second ring or whatever was really intensive. So the new solution is phenomenal. It is account-wide buffs based on the item level that you have. So if any character on your account has a 430 chest piece, all of your characters will have 50% flight stones reduction in costs on Valor upgrades on your chest piece. Plus, your main will not need the crest. If you already have a piece that requires crests, or like at that level or above on your main, you won't need to use crest again to bring gear up to that same level. But your alts will still need the crest. They'll get the flight stone reduction, but they will still need to earn the crests. So also this only applies to your second highest ring, your second highest one-handed weapon, your second highest trinket, not your highest one, which obviously makes sense.
I think this is an absolutely genius way of solving this. We have talked about Valor in the past, and we felt like it was close to being good, right? There was just like these minor nitpick issues where you're like, oh, this is annoying on my alt. Oh, this is really hard to farm, especially with the crafted system and how it influenced the crafted system as well. It's like, oh, dude, this is kind of annoying, but like, this is such a better system than what we've had in the past. And Blizzard somehow figured out a really good way of intertwining all of the systems that we were like worried about together, which I think is very smart. And then making sure that it's not like a big chore to want to start up a new character or boot up a new character, but there is still like some general progression and general reward over time as you do the content.
Yeah. Now, notably, you're still capped at that 415 equivalent. So the 418, 421, 424 equivalent pieces are still, drop or craft only. But this also does tie in with the crafting system because the primal infusions and concentrated primal infusions we've been using.
Exactly.
Next patch, those are instead going to be enchanted Shadow Flame crests. So you earn the Shadow Flame crest, and then you have an enchanter enchant it, and it becomes an optional reagent to be used to bring gear up to that item level for the crafting system as well. So really elegant tie in there. This doesn't apply to PvP gear, but it does apply to outdoor world gear. It does apply to raid gear, to M+ gear. All of those other sources of gear are all going to be on this upgrade system. And it's going to be, I think the biggest upgrade is going to be that you can bring heroic gear now all the way up to 415.
Which is good.
You can bring normal gear up to 411 using this system from your M+ runs. Wow, that is big for first few weeks of gearing.
For tier too.
That's huge.
Imagine
you can bring your tier
LFR tier.
You can bring your tier up LFR tier will only be able to come up to 398 equivalent.
Sure, but like, okay,
still, yeah,
it's better. It's better than having it at LFR.
Oh yeah, that's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think overall that is an absolutely spectacular change. I do find it kind of funny that Blizzard is like, it works for all of these systems except for PvP, which we're not going to mess with. They could have their own system. All right, let's continue to look at some of the other stuff and recap this. Simultaneous release is going to stay for now. That was one of the things that was announced, at least, is simultaneous release is here to stay, and basically that there was an interview that Blizzard's going to continue to have it for the next raid. This is going to repeat the same cadence for Vault of the Incarnates, and Dragonflight Season 2 is scheduled to release 1 week after patch 10.1 goes live, and then we should expect that in spring and summer 2023, aka May to July. We've seen a lot of discourse, a lot of people in the high-end community, specifically the Race World First community, talking about this unlock schedule and simultaneous release, and there's been people on both sides of the argument saying that this is actually pretty good for the game, because there are... Okay, so how this was done in the past, and I will stop before we go forward. How this was done in the past was there was a heroic week. M+ was capped at +6s, and so there was this weird week where M+ was capped and players weren't really able to progress M+, while players who were in the raid were only able to do heroic. Week after that, Mythic Plus unlocked fully, and Mythic Raid was also available, and all of the difficulties were available at that point, pending LFR wings and stuff like that. But you know what I'm saying? Now how it is all of the wings release simultaneously, the raid is fully unlocked, and M+ is fully uncapped, and we don't have this weird week where there is some M+ stuff. And there have been there's been a lot of back and forth where heroic week was better, that it was better for the player base, that players should want heroic week back, whereas there have been some players on the other side saying that this is better for a larger portion of the casual to enthusiast level players, where they much prefer this system where they're able to do M+, and they don't really worry about it too much. Now, Who does this negatively impact and why? Because I think that's something to kind of talk about. Let's talk about
the negative impacts of the system largely land on Mythic Raiders, right?
Okay.
Mythic players that enter Mythic on the first few weeks.
You and I.
Yeah, guilds, Race World First guilds,
yes.
Guilds in the World Top 100, guilds in the World Top 500. You know, there's some people in the World Top 500 that prefer this because it's maybe more exciting to them, but to go into Mythic early. But on the other hand, you know, usually Heroic Week, there was kind of enough novelty for a lot of those players, or for a lot of players anyways, that that part of things was not hugely valuable. And then the drawback, right? The drawback of this is that now you're going into like raids, you have this week where there's just such an overload of stuff to do, right? You need to do all this M+ with all this gear. You need to do these heroic runs. Depending on what level guild you're in, there's these splits that are valuable. And so for those players, for the players that are going into Mythic early, it's largely something that I would say, I would guess that most players who enter Mythic Raid in the first week don't like it, which makes you think, okay, well, if the simultaneous release is only about the Mythic Raid release, the only people it are affecting is the Mythic Raiders. Therefore, they shouldn't do it if most of the Mythic Raiders are having a worse time. But the problem is, like you said, it does justify why the tier, or why the M+ gear is uncapped, which is good for most players, right? Like that is something where there are way more people that do M+ in the early weeks than there are people that set foot into Mythic. So
there has been a middle ground approach that I've seen kind of thrown around a little bit as well, where Mythic Plus just should be unlocked, and we should have Heroic Week as well. I kind of worry about that thing, just generally my thoughts. Like I do kind of worry about that thing really de-incentivizing doing heroic, and I think that I'm kind of the opinion, even though it does mess with me a little bit, I'm kind of the opinion that simultaneous release is better for most players, and if you look at it from that lens, it probably should be dealt with like this, where it's like the most hardcore raiders are going to be negatively, not even most hardcore raiders, but like some hardcore raiders are negatively impacted. A lot of raiders it doesn't even really matter to them, and so it's like, we have to do cringe stuff anyways. It's not like this is anything new. I don't know. Do you have any real thoughts on this? I think that this is probably the best solution, but I don't love it.
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely open to, I think that just going back would be worse.
I agree.
I would be open to ideas that involved, you know, finding some creative ways to have the M+ loot still be good, and also not have such an overloaded week for the high end players. On the other hand, the high end players to an extent are always going to overload themselves, but it's also true that like, there are tiers that are more or less fun to be a cutting edge mythic raider. Like, we're not just talking about Race to World first players that are doing 10 mirror mains or whatever.
Yes, correct.
There are players that are just, this is worse for, that are real players that are not, the super.
They're not you and I. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, I will say that this is going to be less bad than it was in Vault of the Incarnates. Vault of the Incarnates was going to be the hardest version of the system because you were zoning into that raid at like 372 to 378 item levels, something like that. Whereas now you're going to be, which you were playing effectively 30 item levels down, where now you're only going to be playing, 9 to 15 item levels down, depending on the character, right? That kind of thing.
Now, the other concern that Race to World first players have in particular with simultaneous release is the Razageth tuning debacle, which, if that is related, if that's something that has to happen with the simultaneous release, I think that is bad, because that boss was brutally overtuned in 3 separate phases. Well, brutally in 2 and then maybe slightly in 1. And that was like, that's something where if they can fix that by not doing a simultaneous release, then I think that is maybe a good, but I don't think they have, like, I think that was just a separate mistake that's not necessarily something they have to do if they do a simultaneous release.
Dude, I didn't want to come off like a jerk, but I want to say this just happens. Like, I don't think that this is new. I don't think this is new to this system. This literally happened. Dude, we saw N'Zoth be unkillable because there was a bug. Okay, that's
a different thing though than there being a phase that is 50 that is twice as much health as you can do with that gear level, and a shield that needs to get nerfed as well by 50%.
Queen Ashara.
Yeah, Queen Ashara, but these are like, it's a bad thing when this happens. Right?
I don't disagree.
It's something that the simultaneous release is associated with, then that's bad. But yeah, obviously, hopefully they can
fix that.
I think that they could do a simultaneous release and not have that sort of tuning problem that they had on Razageth. But yeah, hopefully that is something they can avoid. Yeah,
I think that you and I are both in the same vein in this. Changes to interrupt lockout duration. These were mostly aimed at PvP. This is another thing that happened in 10.1. Blizzard, I think it was yesterday that this came out. Blizzard stated that we feel like this change would have minimal impact on other content due to how creature spells are generally designed. Hold on, we're going to get this in a second. As most kicks are spent on spells that have inherent cooldowns longer than the interrupt duration. We will also be keeping an extra consideration of these changes for seasonal dungeons. Okay, that's fine. Like, as long as they're really thinking about that for seasonal dungeons, it's mostly fine. But we can talk about it in a second. Basically, all lockout duration was decreased from like 1 second down or so.
Yeah, Rogue's got the 2 seconds, everybody else got the 1 second nerf. And I mean, this generally, you are not concerned with your interrupt lockout in Mythic Plus. There are mobs though where it is relevant. Most notably, there's mobs like the Hydrolance mobs, the Hydrolance casters in Temple of the Jade Serpent. Like, those mobs will chain cast, and they will be stopping chain casting for a little bit when you do your kick. That's going to be for 1 less second now. Now, that being said, it's an entirely new season of Dungeons next season, so they can balance around this, but it does mean that, in particular, chain casty style enemies are going to be ones that will be chain casting a little bit sooner in most groups.
Now, for most players, this is not going to impact them at all. I don't think this really matters too much. I kind of feel similar to this as I did whenever they nerfed AoE stuns coming out of Legion and coming into BFA, where I think it lowers the skill ceiling of groups in M+, and it kind of lowers the amount that you can pull. It kind of makes things a little bit harder to deal with. Now, is this going to be the end-all be-all? No. Well, but
most pulls are not changed by this, is the thing. Like, this is not something that changes very many pulls at all, because it is true that just most pulls you don't run into the timer on these.
And the time that you do, I'm not like super big on these being changed, but at the same point, I generally agree that this doesn't affect M+ as much.
Yeah, it's something where anytime it does affect it, they could change the mob's behavior.
They could change the mob to not.
Hopefully, they are actually going to do that. Of course, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very rare items. They're back. Is the TLDR. There are some that are like class specific this time, and they interact with classes in very direct ways, where you have things such as, where was this one? There was one for like Shaman, Warlock, Monk, Hunter, where your summons attacks have a chance to grant you primary stat for 12 seconds. During this time, you're slowed by 10%. Obviously, this only works with classes that have summoned pets. Like, I think that this kind of stuff and interacting with classes directly is incredibly cool. I actually really like things like this, and I think that moving very rare items, hopefully away from this kind of weird situation that we have right now to this situation, I'm a big fan. I think that just by design, this is super cool.
Yeah, I am also, I think it's cool as well. I mean, so, okay, one problem with these trinkets is they have secondary stat base instead of primary stat base, which means like the monk one, for instance, that haste base. Haste base is not an exciting thing to have on a brewmaster or a windwalker, right?
Verse base for druid, like
right. So that's going to make these trinkets a lot less desirable for some specs compared to others, but maybe that's fine. I do think that the fact that they have found like these specs have debuffs and dots, so let's give them something that procs off that. Oh, these specs all have summons, let's give them something that procs off that. I think that's sweet. They all come with a pretty hefty drawback as well, though. Like 5% increased damage taken, a nasty bleed, a slow. All of these are things that you can be very scared of during during some boss fights.
Yeah. How are you feeling about very rare items? I think that very rare items are actually super cool. I think that they need to be looked at kind of heavily with how it interacts with the vault in particular. I think that that's something that's been kind of weird with just very rare items. It also kind of sucks that all players want them, yet very few players can get them, and that kind of, I don't know, it just ends up kind of feeling like Amanthul's, if you remember that one.
Yeah, so that is I mean, I think that's a separate issue than like these specific very rare items, but yeah, I think it's something that I mean, these ones are a little bit less universally desirable than the previous ones, I guess, which is maybe
that's true. Maybe it's a good thing. I think the very rare items just by design are super cool. I think that the acquisition of them needs to be really changed a bit. But I think that the introduction of the very rare items, do not combine very rare items like the item with the acquisition process, because I think the items are cool, but I think the acquisition process suffered heavily. Now the acquisition process.
Now there are two more very rare items in the raid as well. Yes. There's a cloak and a trinket and a staff as well. The trinkets. The staff and the cloak don't have any effect on them yet. Presumably that's going to change.
Yeah.
The trinket is like a stat stick proc thing, a crit proc thing that has an on use that maybe can only be used when you're like falling more than 15 yards. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work.
Yeah.
But, interesting little effect. Reminds me of like the Rathian cloak from Nihilota.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Anything else that we wanted to cover that you think we missed? I think that's it.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good job of covering most things. Yeah.
Anything else in your interview that we missed? Maybe Shadow Priest rework.
So there's several specs are getting moderate to severe amounts of reworking. Moonkin among them as well.
Yeah, we're
Moonkin's
down.
Getting some changes. Feral, but yeah, Shadow is getting the biggest set of changes, and it's been somewhat polarizing among Shadow priests that I know. There's been some complaints. Some Shadow priests I know like it, but they've like taken some buttons away, and they've added in. They've reduced the insanity gen of the spec by quite a bit as well. But moved some power into some other stuff, given it some cool single target options. So
all right.
I don't know.
I think that was that kind of concludes our 10.1 recap. Somehow we were able to finish this under 30 minutes. We're at the 28-minute mark, so I don't think we should keep you guys too much longer. Make sure you like this video. Leave a comment down below. Is there anything that you'd like us to discuss next week? We would love to hear it, and we will see you guys then. Goodbye.
Later.